Record. All right. Okay, so Jimmy, welcome. Good to have you.
Good to be here.
What I wanted to do today, especially as we're kind of getting started with the process of translation, is to talk about ways in which you can understand grammar better and also increase comprehension. I find that whether it's beginning students or advanced students, what tends to happen is that people, because it's a second language, they tend to take in the words linearly as items on a printed page, instead of being able to do it like they do with their native language, which is convert it into a concept or an impression, and then to be able to have comprehension in that manner. And there's a vast difference between tracking with a story on paper versus being able to track with it in your head. So most people, when they start translating, and again, even as advanced students sometimes, they can get through a sentence and they'll be reading it orally, and they'll get through about 6-7 words, and then they can't remember anything they've just read. At that point, all connection with the story is gone, and they're just trying to pronounce the words and to get to the end of the sentence. And then they have to translate the sentence or verse, and then when they move on to the next verse, it's hard to keep track of what's been said. So one of the things that has helped me communicate grammar and has helped me communicate how to read is to compare sentences to photographs. And this comes out a little bit in the grammar, but I want to develop it a little bit more. If I were to go to a soccer game and my nephew was playing and there's all these other parents on the sideline, we're all seeing exactly the same game, the same events. There's nothing different between the experience that I'm having at that game and everybody else. But if you put a camera in each of our hands, you're going to find that the story conveyed in the camera is different, because they are not going to be interested in my kid. I'm not going to be interested in their kid, even though all of those individuals may be in the same frame in every single photograph. They're going to put the bullseye, that little thing inside the camera, on a different person or thing. For example, there might be somebody there from Nike that is checking out their new generation of soccer balls, and he's taking pictures of the soccer ball instead of the kids. So we've all got this different vantage point. And the frame of reference is a great illustration of what happens in a sentence. The subject of a sentence is not necessarily, well, not at all static. It all depends on how somebody's trying to cast the story. So the guy who's the representative from Nike is focusing on the ball and is always going to have action that is coming at the ball. And in an English sentence or sentence in any language, you would find that his subject of the sentence, because the camera is focused on it, is the subject of a passive verb. Whereas the parents who are focusing on their children are going to be using, if they could convey their photograph in words, would be taking pictures of active actions, active verbs, and the focal point of their camera would be the one doing the action. And that's the only thing that happens with active verbs, passive verbs, etc., is that we have just simply changed the frame of reference within the same scene, and are kind of like expert filmographers, if that's a word, videographers, who are shaping the audience's perception of the action for the purpose of telling the story. So when you look at a sentence is made up of a clause, which at its core has a subject and a verbal idea, and may or may not have extra components. And I liken the subject and the verb to a black and white photograph, and then everything else I liken to color. So you're kind of filling in the picture. It would be kind of like, you ever seen somebody who does one of those sand drawings? You know, they've got music going and they do a sand drawing and it kind of comes to life right in front of you. And then in a moment, they'll sweep their hand across and transition into another scene and rebuild an entirely new scene. It's kind of like that when you're reading. You're getting information that's coming in from the sentence, and it starts out as a black and white photograph or a very simple drawing of an individual or object in an action, and then you keep putting stuff around it until you finish the clause, and then you move to the next one. So we know that a movie is made up of individual frames that you just flip through really fast that creates the sense of motion, but they're actually still photographs in a sequence. It's like that with a narrative in Hebrew. You've got individual clauses that you're moving through. And if we are processing them as visual images rather than as linear words, we'll find that we have a higher rate of comprehension, and it's easier to figure out how you group words and where to focus your attention before you move on to the next bits. So what I want to do is go through your translation from this week, and I want to just highlight a couple things. So in Hebrew, the verb is almost always placed first, unless you're doing focus of some sort where you're going to think of it as word stress. If you're going to stress a different word in the sentence, you're going to tend to put a different element in the front for focus. But in general, a verb goes first, and anytime that you put an and in front of a verb, you have to have a new clause. So you've got a new clause here, and he was, or and it happened, and then you've got a verb here, and he went down. And because the verb has embedded a subject and a verbal idea, you cannot put an and in front of a verb with having a break in the clause. You're starting a new idea. So it's like an entirely new photograph and an entirely new scene every time you transition to one of these other words. Extra information is usually conveyed with prepositions. So prepositional phrases, in, on, with, through, by. You don't have to have them to convey ideas. They just add color and depth to the story. And same thing with sentences. We don't have one visible here yet, but ones that are introduced with key, because, that, when, or a share, who, which, that. You're just giving extra information to the reader. So at its core, this first clause is essentially, and it was, or and something happened. That's a complete thought in and of itself, but the author wants to fill it in a little bit more, and so he includes a preposition telling us that we're getting extra information, and we discover that this event that occurred is in the time, namely that time, so in back then. And this section right here is just simply a prepositional phrase that fills out the picture for us. And I want to be able to see it. I want to be able to identify prepositions and spot units of words that allow me to focus on the main idea, so that I don't end up just trying to put words in a sentence like a collage of cutout magazine pictures. You know, sometimes when I'm in class, a student will translate and I can tell they've got the vocabulary words. They have no idea how they go together, but they have the vocabulary words and they've pasted together a collage based on context. Fortunately, context drives everything, and so most of the time they get it right. But you can tell when they're relying too heavily on that, because you'll get to a sentence that's a little more obscure and they won't get it right because they're not being driven by the words on the page. They're being driven by their reading with their gut. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to have each of you go back and forth, and we're going to identify the lines of demarcation between clauses, and then we're just going to talk about how each of these clauses is put together. And then hopefully what'll happen is you'll also see how you retain the information a lot better when it's converted into a picture, because instead of trying to remember at the end of verse 1 a sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 words, you're only going to be remembering a sequence of 3 or 4 mental pictures that, because of the way that our brain works, are going to be much more memorable than vice versa. Okay, so Jimmy, let's start with you. So we get to the next clause. When you're doing this in Hebrew, hopefully eventually you will get to a point where you pull the information in the sequence in which it occurs. But for now, let me just ask this question: where does the next clause start after this one?
After the Achim.
Good. So I've got a clause break here, and how do I know that it's a clause break?
There's a verb in front of the verb consecutive.
Okay, good. So I've got another verb, so I know that I have to start a new idea when I get to here. So I can concentrate on my elements in this clause. Are there any other things that give us indication of how we might group words, or how we might put together the elements in this clause?
There's a preposition in.
Good. Yeah,
Is
so I
that,
have a preposition here. It's actually a double preposition.
right?
It's min and ate, not ate the direct object, but ate the preposition with. Just like we
Right.
do into, unto. Sometimes we compound prepositions. So I know that I'm also then going to have a sequence here that is kind of extra. Okay, so how would we translate this clause?
And Judah went down from with his brothers.
Yeah, and in English we tend to pick. We don't like piled up prepositions. So pick one. Now, have any of you guys seen Minority Report? Tom Cruise movie. You know, he's David, have you seen that movie?
I think a long time ago. I know the basic premise of it. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you remember that he's trying to stop these crimes before they happen, and he gets this encoded information that rolls out, and he's trying to figure out where things happen and whatever. And so he's got that virtual board, you know, where he's putting information and trying to reconstruct a scene. When you're reading, because we're thinking in terms of like a black and white photograph versus color, just like a photograph is going to focus on the subject, what you're trying to do is put the scene together the way that the author wants you to see it. So when you hit the words in the sentence, you can actually build the story and take in the information in the order that it comes by taking the cues that come from the information on the page and putting it in the picture where it goes. So when I hit the verb, vayered, I know that it's masculine. I know it's past tense. And because this is the focal point, the verb and the subject are the focal point of the story, I'm going to put them in the center. So I know that there's some unnamed guy. So he kind of has, you know, a rough shave. He's got guy clothes on, and I know he's going down. And that's the only information that I'm taking in at the moment, and I'm putting it in the center of my screen. Then I hit a word, and I know that the author didn't have to tell me this, but he's decided to clarify for me who it is that this unnamed shadowy figure is. And instead of now a shadowy unnamed figure, he takes on the clothes and personality of Judah. And my photograph kind of comes into focus like one of those, what were those photographs they kind of spit out and they develop in front of you?
Polaroid.
Polaroid, yeah, it's kind of like a Polaroid. It's coming into focus. And then anything else, your direct object, prepositional phrases, they're things that are going to go on the perimeter of the picture to add information, color, depth, etc. So I've got he went down, namely Judah, me'et ha'achim, from his brothers. So over here in the corner, you know, I've got Judah facing one way, and then logically, I'm going to take this reference to the brothers and I'm going to put it on the other side of the photograph to capture the fact that they're a secondary part of the scene and that there's separation going on because they're, you know, facing in different directions. And my picture takes kind of this rough rudimentary image of what's happening in the action, and I can take it in the order it comes. When we're first translating, we're going to have a tendency to look for information based on grammar. We're looking for the next break in the clause. We're looking to isolate what words to go together. But eventually, when we're reading, we want to be able to read it aloud and get our mind trained to read the Hebrew words so that we can encounter it on every level. We'll hear personal names because they sound like the personal names we know. We'll hear verb forms because they sound like the paradigms we know. And the information will be constructed by us in the order that it comes because we're able to just kind of sift the ideas into their proper sequence. So David, let's go to you and let's go from here. And why don't you talk me through what you see in the remainder of the sentence in terms of clauses, etc.
Talk you through it. It looks like maybe, is there another break after the Adulamite?
There is. Now,
Yeah.
Why did you think there was?
I guess the Vav is the clue.
Okay, it is on, but it's different than when it's in front of a verb. When you have a Vav in front of a verb, it has to be a break.
Yeah.
When you have a Vav in front of a noun, you don't know whether you've transitioned to a new idea or whether you have paired items.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, it's not just the Vav, it's the fact that the word Adulamite isn't something that we normally associate with name. It is a name, but
Yeah.
we know that somehow the topic has shifted. Those kinds of transitions are a little harder to catch. What we have to do to confirm is we have to make sure that the word name is not modifying something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to, if I'm going to make this a new clause, a new image, I still have to have a verb. So we know we have a verb here by Yered. Is there a verb in the this last break that we identified?
Yeah, so that ha'ish is the verb, is that right?
No, because what is ha'ish?
Um,
So when you look at the verb forms you've had so far, you don't have any verbs that have a hierik, I, and a yod in the middle of the word. So
Okay.
So you haven't had. There are some, but you haven't had them yet. So when we look at this word, we may not immediately recognize it. What we ask is, words are kind of like Lego blocks. You're looking for your core word, and then what kinds of elements do we add to the front and the back? Do we ever have components added to the back of a word with a sheen?
I don't believe so.
Good, no, we don't. Do we ever have elements added to the front of a word with a hey?
Yes.
Yeah, definite article, which tells us it's probably a noun, and then we would identify the word as ish. Do you recognize the sound ish?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why oral reading is so important. I can sometimes look at a word on the page and not recognize it, but if I'm sounding it out, my brain will make the connection with the sound I've been learning on my vocabulary cards or with the practice that I've gotten from reading. So I've got a noun, shame. I've got ish, man. I've got a proper name. There's no verb here, but from your translation this week, you know that this would have to be translated the name of the man was. There is a verb, it's just simply not stated. And it doesn't matter whether the verb is stated or not. If I have a verb, it has to be a new clause. So that's one of the nice things is I can confirm that I'm in a new unit, but I've got to make sure that I'm not just assuming that I have something in print to help me divide up the clauses. I have to be thinking in terms of concept units. So now we've got a verse that's divided into 4 different units. We can go back and we can look at this one right here. And we've got the verb and subject. He went down. We know that we're probably continuing Judah from before. So in our brain, we'll probably import the mental information and clarity for this subject. He'll look a lot like Judah in our mind. And then what's ad ish?
Odd is a preposition.
It is. Correct. Good. So we've got secondary information that's being conveyed, and we know that ish is going to go with it. So how would you translate ad ish?
To the man.
To a man.
To a man.
Yeah, so since there's no definite article on here, at this point in the story, the man remains unknown. Okay, he's just vague. So if we were drawing this out in our head, I would probably allow my brain to provide more clarity with the verb, the subject. He went down, because we've already specified who it is. But when I get here to ad ish, in my head, I'm just going to have some guy, he's going to be in the shadows. He's not going to have much clarity. And the word adulami is basically an adjective. It is a nationality. If it was a girl, it would end with a tav. So, like Ruth. Ruth is not a Moavi. Ruth is a Moavite. She's a Moabite. So the fact that this ends as adulami rather than adulamit means that the Adulamite under discussion is definitely a man, and all you've done is you've basically added a word that is a side-by-side clarification of the word we just had. I could essentially use the word odd with either of these. He went down to a man, or like he visited a man, or he visited an Adulamite. Both of these words are basically fitting into the same slot in the sentence. And when I try to figure out how they work in the clause, I'm going to treat them essentially the same. Then I hit my, is that feedback coming from you guys or me? Or are you hearing that?
I don't hear it.
Oh, okay. It's coming on
Yeah.
Living for some reason.
I could hear it. It might be good, yeah, just to mute when somebody's talking.
Okay. So when I get to the next clause down here, anytime you're getting an is, are, was, were, whether it's implied or if it happens to be the verb haya, to be, you're basically getting an equals sign. So think of Vishem Ha'ish, the name of the man, equals Hira. And because just like in math, 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 1 = 3, even though the way that you express the items on each side of the equation may look differently, they have to be saying the same thing. They have to equal one another. So I've got a noun on one side, or in this case, a construct, noun plus noun, and I've got to have something on the other side that is the equivalent, that is re-expressing the identity of the object or person that's on the other side. So at the end of verse 1, we've got 4 clauses, and because of how we have envisioned them and talked them through, we have a lot more recollection of what we have just encountered than if we were just simply going through, glossing the words and treating them in a linear fashion. So let's carry on from here, and we'll go back to you, David. Or no, David, did you just do the last one, David? Yes, because Jimmy, you did the first one, right? Yeah. All right. So Jimmy, back to you. Let's do verse 2 and take me as far as the first clause.
So I had a slight question, or one question. So I think it's helpful to visualize the sentence as you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to put it into like a phrase diagram, so obviously each clause would have its own line,
exactly,
right? And then the coordinating conjunction there would,
right. So when you're dealing with a phrase diagram, and just to clarify, so that everybody's on the same page, there are 2 types of diagramming. One diagram is what you call a grammatical diagram, or syntactical diagram would be a better way to discuss it. And what it basically does is it forces somebody to identify the part of speech. So what is the subject? What is the direct object? The problem is most people these days don't even know what those terms mean. So it gets to be a little bit complicated. So what we found to be much more productive is clause diagramming or phrase diagramming. And what you basically do is what we're doing right here. You're going to identify anything that has a verbal idea and treat it on the same line. And there's a section in the back of the grammar that actually talks about how you do that. And what you're looking for on a macro level, so right now we're looking at the individual snapshots of the story. If we were going to create a visual time, let's say we're doing a presentation of our story, and we're restricted to the mental images that we have developed, what would happen was we would stack these mental images from top to bottom in the sequence that they occur, and we would try to show the difference between the narrator and the actual conversations that go on with the people in the story, kind of like Princess Bride. You know, you've got the narration happening on the outside, and then you've got an entire world inside. So when we get these VAV consecutives, almost always you're talking about the narrator. And it happened in that time that Judah went down from his brothers, and he went down to an Adulamite man, and the name of the man was Hira. And we would just stack these images aligned all the way down, you know, the wall, until we get to an event where the narrator tells us something like, and he said to the man. And as soon as you get that, all bets are off, and you have jumped into the story, and you have to realign your frame of reference because you don't know what they're going to say. They could be talking about the past. He could say, I had chicken for dinner last night. Or he could be talking about the future. I think I'll go to the flock and get a lamb for dinner. You know, you don't know the time frame. So as soon as you break with the sequence, you have to recalibrate and move on. And in a grammatical diagram, trying to visually capture the story rather than just the clause, we would move those photographs over, or maybe put them in a separate box or something, to show that we have an entirely separate unit that is a story within a story. So that's kind of the simple answer to that. So if you're interested in that, and I know, Jimmy, you've dealt with some Hebrew before, I think it's Appendix 3 talks about the phrase diagramming and how that works, and the value you can get from that. So, all right. So here's our verb. Carry me through this new clause.
So it goes all the way. There's another v'shem.
Okay, good. Yes. And we don't have to solve this one as much because we've already been predisposed to recognize that when they introduce a name reference, that we're going to have a tendency to have a new clause break. So take me through your building of the picture in this first clause.
There, and he saw there, Judah saw there.
Good. Now, our subject, so if we're thinking about the camera, we know when we hit Judah, because the verbs have all been third masculine singular, we know that this name is the guy doing the action. It's just that the narrator has chosen to delay the information, and he's going to slide this little word in here because that's more central to what the information that he needs to convey. So he can hold off on the subject. But when we reconstruct it in our minds, we're going to have a tendency to slide this word into the center of our screen as we rebuild the information of what's going on.
So the function of that sham there is to kind of reorient you to the focus being it's
right
there.
And that the action, this is basically functioning like an adverb. Okay, right. Judah saw something. We're going to find out he saw something, but this is going to tell us how he saw. Where was he? What were the conditions under which it happened? And so if we were, again, kind of putting it into a frame of reference, the word sham is going to import into our mind images of a village, of a location that's different from where he had been before, and, you know, help give us a sense of context. Then what do we get?
A daughter of a man.
Good. So we've got a construct. It helps that it's hyphenated.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that hyphenation, the McCabe, doesn't mean it's a construct, because we saw it up here in verse 1 with preposition. You can hyphenate anything. The only thing hyphenation does is it forces you to read it as a unit instead of two separate entities. So I could leave this hyphen out. It would still mean exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say Vayar Sham Yehuda Bat Ish Kanani. Whereas with the hyphen in, I say Vayar Sham Yehuda Batish Kanani. I treat it as a unit. So remember not to just assume that because it's hyphenated that it's a construct. It's purely about pronunciation, but it helps you at least know that you're not going to separate those two words out. They have to be together. And then we're left with a little bit of a conundrum because I get Kana'ani. Now, who does Kana'ani go with?
Mm-hmm.
Does it go with Bat or does it go with Ish?
Mm-hmm.
The Hirik Yod at the end and the absence of a Tav means that this is a reference to nationality for a man, not the reference to nationality for a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I could, depending on what my focus was as an author, I could tell you Judah saw there a daughter of a man, Canaanite, and I would tell you that my focus isn't on where the guy came from, it's on the fact that the girl is a Canaanite. The fact that I don't have it on there means that at this point, it's not so much on the daughter, I'm still thinking about this man, and that I've identified a Canaanite man who has a daughter. That's a very subtle difference, but that's like in a movie where a guy who's a really good filmer is going to be able to shape how you see everything, the shadows, where the focus of attention is on. And I have to make decisions about that when I translate. Is my translation accurately capturing the focus of the author rather than the information of the scene? Because again, if I go to a soccer game, what's my goal? Is my goal to accurately represent my photo album, or is the task to represent any photo album that accurately captures the event that occurred? That's where scholars are often talking about the difference between text and event. Sometimes in our preaching, we have a tendency to reconstruct events rather than to try and tell them as the author is presenting it to us in the text. And those things become really, really important. Okay? All right, finish out one more clause, Jimmy, and then I'll go back to David. Where's our next clause going to go?
Just quick question there, because of the Kanai, so that makes the bot definite?
No, it doesn't. So
Okay.
in order to keep the emphasis on color, I'm going to do this. I don't have any prepositions in here, so I'm going to use yellow here. My Kana'ani is an adjective that's clarifying something about the man.
Mm-hmm.
Bat ish is indefinite, because remember that in a construct phrase, the definiteness is conveyed by the definiteness of the last noun in the string.
Right.
Ish is indefinite. So this is an unspecified daughter of an unspecified man.
Yeah.
It happens to be that this unspecified man is at least clearly a Canaanite, but I still don't know who he is yet.
Yeah.
And I put this in color so that I remember that, oh, this whole set of information is extra. I didn't have to tell you that Judah saw a woman. I could have just said Vayarsham Yehuda. Judah saw something there. I could leave it unspecified. At its very core, I can still get away with the sentence having only the verb with its embedded subject. Something happened, he went down, and there was a name, the name of the man was Hira, and he saw something. I mean, at its very core, that's the most basic elements of what's taking place. I'm not going to be particularly satisfied with just the verb and its embedded subject, so I need some of these extra elements. But every aspect that I add is adding color and clarity to what's going on.
So if the bat was in construct with kana ani, then it would be definite, right?
No, still not, because Kana'ani, it's a nationality, but I still haven't said
Ha
Kana'ani.
Right.
Now, if I did Ha Kana'ani, then I would be saying he went down to the Canaanite, which would mean that there's only one Canaanite in town.
Right.
And that he happened to see that particular man's daughter.
Yeah.
So I either have to do Ha Kana'ani, or let's see, I can never remember where the keys are here. I would have to say Bat Ha'ish, the daughter of the man, namely, and then I'm going to clarify for you which man it is. It's Ha Kana'ani.
Right. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it there. In the next class, it's goes all the way to Shua, then it breaks again.
Okay. And what's my verb? Since it's a clause, I have to have a verb. What's my verb?
It's implied.
Good. So again, I've got an implied verb. Was. And the way that you know where to put the verb is always, again, based on your grouping. So up here at the end of verse 1, I had a construct phrase, Shem Ha'ish. They're not joined with a Makef, but they're still inseparable because it's a construct chain. Mm-hmm. So there may be 3 words, but the only place I can put the verb is between the unit and the name. And the same thing down here. The only place where I can put the verb is between the unit and the name. Mm-hmm. So that helps. If you have a sentence that's more complex, and I've got, instead of a construct chain, I may have to take the time to maybe differentiate, like right here at the end of the second line, Ish Kana'ani. I have to establish that Ish and Kana'ani are connected, that this is just an adjective, and that they occupy the same slot, namely it's a man, it's a Canaanite, and I have to go through a little bit more, lengthy process of trying to identify that these really belong together so that I don't, insert a word in the improper place. Okay, all right, David, back to you. Take us through the rest of the line.
Sorry, were you asking me?
Yeah, so David, take us through the rest of the line. We're going to have a clause break at the end of the verse, usually. Okay, now don't sure. Always anticipate. You always want to confirm. When you get into, for example, Deuteronomy, where you've got discourse, sometimes a sentence, Moses is going to talk, and he's going to use, when you were in the wilderness, that the Lord led you into because you were disobedient and did not follow God. You haven't even gotten to your main clause yet, but you got so many words that it has to be a verse. When you're in a book like Deuteronomy, you may not actually finish the sentence at the end of a verse, but you will almost always finish a verbal picture. because you'll be dealing with clauses. The difference will be that those clauses are stacked, and you've got primary information, secondary information. So we never want to kind of assume that we're done when we get to the end of a verse, but we can almost always start a new mental picture.
Sure.
So anyway, what am I going to do here?
So I'm a little confused by this. So it's Vayika is the Vayikach is the verb, but I don't remember what that.
Now, remember that in the grammar, because we're kind of helping you become intuitive with weak verbs until we actually get to them, we are going to identify and gloss the verb for you down below. And then we're asking you to constantly look for the building block components. So when you look at a verb, the vav, the patach, let me do this here. The vav, the patach, and hopefully I'll get this in the right order. I think it's, nope, that's the vowel. Undoes more than I want. Vav, patach, and doubling dot is an indication of the vav consecutive that's going to be past tense time. And no matter what verb you get, that yod or whatever consonant it is that you are putting the dot in is always the indication of your subject. It's not part of the root. It's always part of what's built onto the verb. So lakach is the verb. It means to take.
Okay.
Because it's a weak verb, I'm only going to get part of the consonants in here, but I can always rest assured that the vav, patach, doubling dot is telling me past tense, and that whatever consonant that dagesh is being put in is indicating to me the subject. So in this case, he, it. So, and he took.
Yeah, okay. So, and he took, and then is that a preposition or?
Possibly. So et can be the preposition with, or it can be what?
It marks a direct object. Is that right?
Yes. Now, it could be, and he took with somebody else taking, but in all likelihood, because of the type of verb I have, I'm probably getting an indication of who the direct object is. So we know he took something.
Yeah.
And it helps that I've got a hyphenated unit. So he took, and then this, and then I'm getting a word with
the preposition.
With the preposition, which means that this also is a unit. Now that helps me break things apart, and I'm going to treat them in components. So he took.
So he took the daughter of Shua.
Exactly. Yeah. So kind of like in oh shoot, what was the word that I wanted? Like Norway, he took the daughter of Shua. Well, that's also her name, Bat-shua.
Okay.
I've been identified with the fact that this Canaanite was named Shua, and instead of being called Nielsen or Anders' son or whatever, we're getting the same kind of thing. I can either translate it as he took the daughter of Shua, or he took Bat-shua la Isha.
Yeah. Okay. So two Is that to the woman?
Not the
Or to
woman,
a woman?
to a woman. Now, why would I say this? Every experience with Hebrew is a cross-cultural encounter. And when I'm working with this, I'm going to have to figure out how this preposition is being used. It's adding color to my story. He took the daughter of Shua, and then where am I going to put this? What does it mean to a woman? Did he take her to go visit somebody? Did he, what's he trying to say?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's clear to me.
Okay. Now, this will help. The word woman in Hebrew is used both generically, and it's also used to fill in vocabulary that we have other terms for. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it has no definite article. So he takes this woman for a particular purpose.
Yeah.
For a
so he
wife.
took her for a wife. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then we move on from there. So when you're translating, the more that we can isolate, like here we had a little bit of trouble with this last expression because it's not how we say it in English. The more that I can isolate, and I don't have to worry about the words that come next, I don't have to worry about the words that went before. I've got only 5 words that I have to concentrate on in order to create a complete thought unit. And if I can visualize, if I can concentrate on what the core ideas are of that mental image and then add in the extra components, it helps me process through what's going on in this clause, and I can finish, and then I can move on to the next one. And no matter how complicated it got in the middle of my work, I can unpack it and get a mental picture in mind, and all the complexities drop away, and instead I'm left with a concept that I can carry with me as I move on, and I have comprehension. So that helps tremendously when I'm reading. And even if I'm not translating, I'm just reading aloud and understanding as I read. No matter how much trouble I have with a particular segment of a verse, I don't move forward until I understand. And then as I move forward, I don't have to try and remember the words in the sentence. I instead remember what I read. And that allows you to think about narrative strategy and themes and keywords, and to think about the passage on an entirely different level. So, yeah. All righty, well, we're done, and hopefully that kind of helps in terms of processing through sentences. And yeah, so hope everything's going well with both of you, and we'll catch you on the next round.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fultz.
You're very welcome.